As quilters, it's always fun to go out and buy new fabric. Sometimes maybe we don't always need it when we think we do, like when we're making a quilt and we don't quite have the color or the print or the style fabric that we want, and we run to the store real quick, we grab it, and somehow that's going to make the quilt just perfect. Well, I'm going to challenge you today to maybe look at that a little bit differently. I'm Lea Louise from Inspired Quilting by Lea Louise, and I've come up with some techniques that have worked for me, and it was out of duress on my part. I was living in a country on an island with no stores, no quilt stores, no Walmart, not even a dollar store, and so I had to come up with solutions on my own without buying new fabric. And I found out that if I look through my pile, my stash, my scraps, my fat quarters deep enough, there was always something there that I could use. So I want to talk to you about that today, how to combine your fat quarters, how to bring your pre-cuts, your stash fabrics, your scrap fabrics into any new project you're working on to make it even more glorious. So let's go ahead and get started. I am anxious to show you this. Charm squares are a lot of fun to quilt with. You can do so much with them. They're versatile. You can mix them. The size makes them easy to create individual blocks, large, small. You can do the cross cut. You've seen the disappearing 9 patches, things like that. There's so much you can do. Even better, though, is if you have a pattern that you like in charm square size, you can bump this up. It's at 5. It starts at 5. You can go to 6, 8, or 10 and use a layer cake. Get the same pattern but with a larger block. So it's really versatile and it's a lot of fun. If you haven't used charm squares before, I recommend you buy a pack and just play with them and see what you can do. What I want to show you today is a particular quilt that is quite simple. It's easy to do. And it's a lot of fun because there's so much you can do with playing with the color. Now this one in particular is low volume, and then I used bright batiks in order to create the pattern. It's called the Baby Bricks. This itself is a free pattern. And what I want to show you is how to put this together with charm squares, but we're starting with fat quarters. I love combining my fat quarters to create a charm square quilt because I can pick the colors that I'm going to work with. I don't buy a lot of pre-cut charm packs because I like to put my colors together. Now I may start with a charm pack and add to it. Sometimes pull out something that maybe I don't want to include, whatever the case may be. But I buy fat quarters almost exclusively, so I just cut my own charm squares and layer cakes from that. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But first, let me just show you. This is a very simple pattern. And it's alternating 2 blocks. So we have 2 focal color, 2 background, 2 focal and 2 background. But then what we do is we offset it by 1. So we start with a single background and then 2 focal, 2 background, 2 focal. And we just offset that by 1, and that creates this stair step pattern. And this is great for showing off your fabrics. I've done this where I've used a white, and white can be great because it's a really good background to let a bright fabric really stand out. In other words, white can create a great contrast with what you're working with. I really enjoy using low volume in the background. You can still use a lighter color, but I appreciate all the different patterns. It makes such an interesting quilt. And low volume fabrics are so accessible today in so many different patterns and dimensions of, or not dimensions, what do I want to say, variety of values. They're real light like this. Some can be darker. And then you can get into just your black and white for the great contrast. Those are wonderful too. But for now, we're going to work with low volume, and we're going to work with some batiks in a more dominant color. Let the low volume be the background. So with all that being said, let's take a look at this. When you piece these, you're going to just chain piece. You'll start with your first row, and you'll have one charm square, and you'll sew this one, you'll sew this one, and you just follow your pattern throughout. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm doing that, oftentimes I'm going to lose track and I'll grab a wrong square, or I'll miss a row and then the rest of the rows will be off, or a row will get twisted and they get caught up together. So when I do chain piecing, I prefer bigger squares than small. And if I just use 5-inch squares and do the chain piecing, I'm bound to make a mistake. And I just know that about me. Maybe you don't have that problem, and that's wonderful. But I do, so I find ways to compensate in order to eliminate the possibility of those kinds of problems. So what I want to show you is there's a pattern here that you can follow that will create a 4-patch. So let's look at this corner right here. We have 3 focal and a background. 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's our 4-patch right there. The second block, so we have an alternating pattern here, is 3 background, your 3 low volumes, and a focal. So this and this is the same 4-patch, but the colors are placed in opposite direction, or in opposite places. So where we have the bold here, we have the low volume here. Where we have the low volume here, we have the bold here. So once you create your 4 patches, then you're going to put your quilt together and it's going to go quick and easy. The best thing I like about this is I can press these first. One of the challenges for me after a quilt is pieced, if parts of it aren't pre-pressed, in other words, if all the blocks aren't pressed in advance, I find it a challenge to press the whole thing at once, only because some of the seams don't always go where I want, and it is just, I don't know, awkward for me. So when I have squares like this that I can work on and pre-press some of that, it's going to make it a lot easier for me. Now, let me show you how we can then take it one step further. So we have this 4-patch here, and we have this 4-patch here. Now, if you really want to take it to a new level, look at this. This 4-patch is the same as this one, and this is the same as this. All you need are these 2 blocks, and you just alternate them throughout the quilt. You start the first row here, you start with the second row, and then you alternate. No mistakes. You're not going to get confused because all you have to do is, oh, this is the 3 colors. I need the one with 3 background. It makes putting this quilt together easy and quicker because you don't have to stop and count and see where am I and where did I leave off and what's going to come next, etc. So this works really, really well for me. And that's what I want to show you today. So we're going to take a look at that after. The other thing I want to show you is a fun way to quilt your charm squares. And in this one, it's a very simple, actually you can probably see the quilting itself better on the back, simply because the single color, you can see the pattern. It's just an easy meandering S-curve, and I just go from one side to the other. Actually, I start in the corners. Let me show you here. So what I do is I start in the corner and I go from one corner to the other. I'll put the video link up above for the tutorial on that, because one of the difficult parts of doing this is coming out at the opposite corner in a relatively straight line. You can go in and mark it, but I have a much easier way to show you, and I can just give you a quick glimpse here. If you're quilting along and you're coming from this corner and you're going along, if you take the opposite corner that you're sewing to and you place it here with this side being even, this is going to show you where the middle is. And so you're sewing along and you say, okay, where's my middle? And as long as this lays square and even from the sides, you can tell if this is crooked, right? Put it square in the middle and then you just aim for this corner. That's going to get you across. And then when you do your quilting, just quilt to one side, finish, go to the other side and finish. The advantage to doing something like this is that the quilting can be difficult to manage when you have to roll up a bunch of fabric in your quilt, or excuse me, in your sewing machine as you're quilting through. So instead of doing it that way, when you're quilting diagonally, you just have the smaller corner. And this is a lot less to tuck in your machine than if you do it straight like this and you have this whole piece. So I quilt most things on the diagonal. It works really well for me. And that's been something that I've been doing for a couple years, and I like that. I do want to show you another pattern, another quilting pattern that works really well for charm squares. Here's another charm square quilt. Now, this is a 9 patch. And if you'll see, I have my 9 blocks. I have my focal on 2 sides and a focal in the middle, and then low volume. I like to have contrast in my blocks in order to just create more interest, and I like just the patterns that it brings out and the contrast that it creates. But what I want you to see, try to see here, we can probably see it right here, because I used a light thread, and on this dark fabric you should be able to see, this is what they call the orange peel. Now mine are a bit on the narrow side, but you just come and you do this S curve, but each S, each time you curve, you want to go through that intersection where the corners come together. And I like this because for me, it's sort of extra security in that corner. It holds everything nice and tight, so nothing's going to come loose. And you do it in one direction, so you come down all the way to this end of the quilt, then you come back and do it the other way, and then you go in the opposite direction. I just think it adds a nice pattern. I like the look of that particular curve going through there. Curves are always nice to quilt with when you're dealing with repetitive squares, straight lines, 90-degree angles, such as that. Now, this one, I think you might be able to see on the back, because I used a light thread, and this backing has quite a bit of dark color in it, and it looks pretty. It's nothing fancy. It does take a little more time because you're going over the same seam or the same direction 2 times. You're going down and then coming back in order to get the full effect of that curve. But it works out really well, and this is a fun pattern. Actually, this is a free pattern too, so I will put the links for both these free patterns down below. But I want to show you how this quilt we're doing today goes together. You saw the one hanging behind me. That's the one I did in some really bright, bold batiks. We're going to do it a little differently today. Choose some different colors, kind of step outside that box that I want to stay in, and I'll show you some other ideas. Here's a bundle of batiks I've been hanging on to for a very long time. I bought them because I love the blues and the tans, sort of the creamy grays. There's bits of green and just a little hint of yellow here and there, and I think they're beautiful. I don't know what to do with them. I've had a challenge of trying to figure out how to put it together, because if I just use these, then it's going to be very monochromatic, very low, uninteresting, no contrast, no accents, and so I need to figure out what to do with it. And I've tried some different fabrics along the way, and I just haven't gotten there. But you can see how there's this group that has the blues and the grays, and there's a bit of pink and green, and there's some other colors that work really nice. These are strictly the blue and the kind of a gray blue with whites background, and they're not a stark white, but it's a nice white that creates a good contrast within the blues, so you can see the colors well. This here doesn't have the gray. It's more of the cream colors with the tan, and I think this is one I added to the group because it has more green than anything else, but I really like how it works in here. And so I've been playing back and forth with this. I've pulled it out a number of times, and today I decided this is what I'm going to use. I need to find what will work. So this is all about combining my fat quarters in order to create a color scheme that I really like. I'm going to make the baby bricks pattern, And here's a grayed out version that I include with this in the online course that has the pattern in multiple sizes. And I like doing this because I can kind of come back in and colorize it and decide what's going to work for me. But for now, I just need to figure out my colors. So the first thing I thought is I would use these blues as my primary colors and then use these sort of as my background. Actually, these two would be primary and these would be like the low volume background, but they're all the same tone, the same value. There wouldn't be enough contrast because even though the color is different, it's not going to stand out enough to really make a statement. And if you just want a really low-key, subdued quilt, then that would work out fine. The reason I don't want to do that is because it doesn't show up on videos and it doesn't show up online, and it just looks like a monochromatic scheme of colors. So I prefer using some brighter colors because it really makes more of a statement, and I like it better with lots of colors. So let me show you what I did. The first thing I decided is if I use these as sort of my primary colors, this is going to be the color of the quilt, and then come up with something as a background. One of the first things I came up with is this fabric, and it may look like it's a solid color, but it does have sort of tone on tone. It has some creamy tan blotches of color and bits of cream spattered throughout. There are actually some little patterns like organic leaves and veins and things like that. So while it's very low key, I think this could work really well. But again, monochromatic. There's nothing going on here. So I thought, all right, let's get the low volume out and see what I can find in my low volume basket. I have a couple different low volume baskets simply because I have a couple multiple projects. These tend to be more the off sizes. They don't quite have all the some of the leftovers that weren't a total of 5 inches, or maybe leftover strips. And these are not batiks on this side. I have some batiks mixed in here. I think I want to stick with batiks on this strictly because there's predominantly batiks here, and I'm not going to add enough more fabric that are non-batiks that you wouldn't really see the difference between it. I don't want to see a quilt of batiks with just a couple sporadic pieces in there that appear not to fit. Let's put it that way. And so what I've done is a lot of these, oh, here we go. Like here are some batiks that I have in some lighter colors, and look, this is sort of that gray blue. This works up here with that really well. And here's some, and oh, these are okay. Here we are. We've got some good ones here. These are batiks in this. It's a bit on the creamy side with a bit of the yellow and almost a green. This has a swirl in it, and this has more like a ferny leaf, but it's a really small design. I mean, it's not large and overbearing. So these are some that I could use, but again, see how everything's kind of looking the same here. What else do I have in here that's a batik? Okay, that's more of that one. Oh, here's a pretty one. This one is in a blue. That would look kind of nice. Not unlike this because it has the gray and the tan lines, so I'm liking this. And okay, so I have some others here, so these would work. Now, I don't know about, oh, here, there's a pretty one. I like that one. This one I like. I think it might be too much. Nothing else in here is this stark, and I don't want to put a few blocks in that are going to stand out so much they just become the dominant focus of the quilt. That's not what I'm going for. I want an all over pattern. So I've got a few more colors to add, but again, this is part of this group here, and it's very similar in pattern and kind of the overall design. So let's just kind of look at these and see what we can come up with. I'm just going to, oh, here's one. This is one I like. This would be a good one too. So let's put this here, and just so I can get an idea of what I have. So these are some pieces left over from fat quarters, and they're already trimmed down to 5 inches. So when I trim my fat quarters down, I cut them in 5, 10, and or 2.5 inch. When I cut my 5 inch, I'll leave them in the long strip, the width of the fabric, which is generally 20 inches on the fat quarters, so that if I need them at 2.5, I can cut them, or if I want 5 inch, I have it too. So I don't commit to overcutting my fat quarters. I cut them to a point where I can use them in the moment, and then leave behind big enough pieces I can go back and reevaluate. So here are some colors, and it sort of plays together. And I think I do have another low volume basket to look at. So here's another basket I have, and kind of the same thing. This is a little purpley, but the blue, and look at how well it goes with that one back there. So I can, you know, it's not a bright enough color that I'm concerned it goes with the blues, but I'm liking how it works with this one, because these blues are a little bit different than the rest. So I do like that. This is a solid, and see, the solid is just too stark. I don't want to go with that. Oh, here's a pretty batik. Let me make sure. Oh yeah, I've got 5 inches there. So this is more of the tone on tone with the cream. This has just a tint of green. Oh, you know what? This is the same as that right there. Okay. Ooh, and the circles. I like the circles, and that we're getting a little bit into just the bluish green. So I'm finding some colors here. Ooh, that's a pretty one. That's not unlike this print right there, but in a much lighter colorway. And let's see what else I have here. This isn't very much in the way of batiks. And I did decide I want to pretty much stay with batiks on this. These I think would be, well, let's see, is that too much color? Okay, that purpley one underneath definitely is. This is an option. I'll go ahead and keep that one out to think about it. If I have a couple other pieces like that, if I can get more of these so that there's multiple pieces that sort of have similar looks. Okay, now some of these are definitely way too much color, and here's more of this one here. I think I've got a couple of those. Now this one, that could work, because see, this has that sort of, I don't want to call it russet or orange, I'm not sure, but it is a bit of a rusty color, and that works with this group in a light way. See, this one, there's too much of a pattern. That one's too dark. So I think I kind of have what I can get out of here. And there we go. I need to see if I have more of this. I do have a box of charms that I have pre-cut, and I'm going to go dig through there because that's a possibility. But here I am. These are the colors I'm looking at. These are the fabrics I've selected. And so I am bringing in a little bit more, but all in all, this is very monochromatic. What do you add to this group to bring in some colors? So at this point, my thought is, if I use these as the low volume, all of them together, and then come up maybe with a color scheme to work with this. So I have these blues. If I were to take these blues out, and let's see, keep anything that's in the blue-gray over here, and these then become the backgrounds of the low volume, and they're tan, so I think that would all work pretty well. But I still want more contrast than what I have here. So I'm going to go for some color. I have blue. Let me see what I may have in the blue. I'll tell you though, my first thought is to go with something really boldly contrasting. So let's take a look first at something that's totally off the charts, not in this color scheme whatsoever, opposite side of the color wheel, but it might still work. I recently worked with a lot of reds, orange, pinks, fuchsias, some really great colors, a lot of purples and corals. And so I had a lot of pieces, and I had cut a lot of fat quarters into charm squares in advance, knowing that I'd probably come back to use them. Now, I want to find a color that's really going to stand out. And again, I want to stay with the batiks, simply because there's so many batiks. I don't have enough other fabrics that are not batiks in other colors that will work for what I want. And so I pulled some of these aside. If you go online, if you're ever looking for a color scheme, so here I had blue and tan basically, or blue and beige. If I were to go online and look up blue and beige or blue and tan color scheme and see what that does, see what it brings up. Sometimes it'll add another color or some different shades that can give you some ideas of what direction to go. Or you can look for contrast or accent color for blue and tan color scheme. So put these in, and there's a lot of this out there on Google, and you can get some really good ideas of what might mix, you know, what you might not have thought about. If you don't want to pull out every fabric in your stash, then take a look online and get some ideas, and then when you're looking through your fabric, you might find something. And I saw these. Now, this would look pretty with this. This is a great color. I don't want to do another, you know, dominantly rosy red kind of a quilt, but I do love this. That, I think, would be beautiful, only because it's a great color that I like. I don't really have enough of it. I could incorporate some of these. Some of these are more on the orange side. If I were to do it, I'd want to stay with the pinky red fuchsia color, which I have a few of them here. So this was one option, and I could probably pull it off with what I have, but some of the other colors that were in there, you know, like this purple and this, and, you know, some of these orangey colors, that's not at all where I want to go. So I went ahead and I put this pile back. Next to come out are the blues. So I have some fun blues that I like. This is a new bundle that I recently purchased, and I pulled these three out because they're mostly blues. This collection is predominantly teals, turquoise and teal, and this is definitely blue. I didn't want to go into a teal. Like I said, I'm trying to stay in this color scheme because I like it so much, and I thought so blues would work out pretty good here. And then I found these fat quarters. And again, these are pieces of fat quarters that I have left over. And these would work pretty well too. So if I were to use some of these, now you see how using a darker color as my focal fabric and using these as my low volume background, I'm getting a better look to this quilt. I'm liking how I see more contrast between the dominant fabric and the background. And then I have, these are pieces of yardage. Actually, this is a piece of a fat quarter. I like that. And this is nice because all of these have the bit of lighter blues that are in here. And here's some real dark pieces. This is some yardage I had from some leftover quilt backs. And so this would work too. And let me just kind of tuck this under here. We can take a look at that. And I think that would work out really nice. Those colors all come together great. And then I thought, oh wait, I have another blue collection I just received. And while I grabbed it, I saw the purple one. We just talked about these in the last few weeks. The purple, no, definitely not going to work. That's just, there are some blues up here, but I think there's too much purple and it's way too turquoise to really fit. I don't want to go into the lavenders. So I'm thinking about this one. Let me reopen this. because these have some beautiful colors, and they're right in line because I have these dark blues that work beautifully, and we get into some lighter blues like this. But then look, we've got the gray blue, which is perfect, and then we have a couple low volume pieces that'll work. So this whole pack would be perfect to fit in with this quilt. So I'm liking that. So now we have some more blues to work with, which is kind of fun. So now we're kind of coming onto a pattern or a plan, let's say that. And I'm thinking that a bit more would be better because I've got a lot of different fabrics for the background. This quilt that I'm making will need 168 charm squares, which is equal to 4 charm packs. And half will be low volume, half will be focal. So I want to have about 80, and at the rate I'm going here, I have about 40 pieces already for the background, so I'm only going to have a pair of each of these. And so there's a lot of different fabrics for this quilt. I want to get more though, because I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, roughly 12 and 12, so there's about 24 here, probably 20 that would actually be in my focal. And that means I would have, let's see, 4 of each of these in the quilt, and that's fine because it's going to be spread out. But then I remembered, oh yeah, I have this. And while this is really kind of bold, this blue one would add some great brightness. I don't want to go with that turquoise. I don't know, that might work. And this one takes us to a whole different color. I wouldn't go there. So I would use this blue one and probably that because it really works with those colors. So that's another option. And in looking at this, I thought, you know, there's a couple here that I thought worked really well with this green, because blue and green obviously are colors that go well together, and that might be another option to add to the blue. I definitely like the blue. The blue's a keeper. And if I can find some greens, I think I'll have what I'm looking for. So let me go ahead and grab the green fabrics. Here are a group of greens that I have, and again, I'm going batik, so there are some of the greens that wouldn't really work for me because they weren't in the batik or they weren't in the colors that I want. And I like this. I think this would work out really good with these blues. So there's dark greens, there's some blue green. I like that this has some of the tan color that's in these low volumes, as does this. So this brings a lot together, and we've got the light bright blues and we have the lighter bright green. So I think this is going to work really well. I've come a long ways from the original quilt that was going to be blue and tan, but I really like how these colors work together. I think it'll be beautiful. So going from here with the additional fabrics that I found, these additional charm squares that had been pre-cut, I have my low volume background. This will add color to the low volume background to really bring the blue into the design, so that we know that blue is where we're going. This is definitely going to be a blue quilt, let's put it that way. And I think it's going to be beautiful. And then we get the dark blues, we bring in some greens, and look at what a gorgeous quilt we have. I think this will be perfect. This really did plague me. This took me a long time to pull these colors together. It just sometimes requires you to sit down and just go through the fabrics and put them together, see what works, what do you like, and throw in some that you think, oh, I'll never use this in here, but you know, there might be a few pieces. And I decided to keep any of the reds or that fuchsia out. As much as I like it, I kind of want to keep this blue-green color going. I like this color scheme a lot. I think this would be really, really pretty. So I'm going to get some fabric cut. I'll get all my squares together. We'll take a look at what that involves, and I'll show you how to piece this quilt. It's really easy. Plus, I found a shortcut. Anytime I can put my charm squares together in a larger block and then piece the quilt, I am all for it. I don't particularly care to take 5-inch squares, and in this case they're going to be 12 by 14. So I have to do a 12 across and 14 down, or however you decide to lay it out. And having all those small pieces and that many in each row, invariably one of my rows I'll either skip it or it'll get twisted when I do my chain piecing. So if I make them bigger, it works well for me. And in this case it's going to be a 4-patch, and there'll be 2 different 4 patches and they'll alternate, but it's going to create the pattern beautifully, and I think you're really going to like this. So let me go ahead and pull all that together and I'll show you where we're headed. I've decided to make this quilt in 5-inch squares. That'll be 12 across by 14, and that will give me a 54 by 63 inch lap quilt. And I've also determined that I want to get about 4 of each color in order to give me enough charm squares to work with. And given that I need a total of 168 charm squares, but I only need about 84 of each color, or excuse me, of 8 of each color, in that I've got my blue and greens, and then I have my low volumes, and so then I'll break it down from there. These are the ones that were already cut, so those are good to go. These I need to cut. These are the ones that were in my pre-cut basket. So after I cut my fat quarters, I cut off what I'm going to use, and then I put them aside without overcutting them. And that means that I leave them in the biggest pieces possible, so if I need to use them in the future, I have more options. These I went ahead and cut into 5-inch strips. Some of these are full widths of fabric, and some of these are from fat quarters. Same thing here. Now these are 6 inches instead of the 5. So this, well, and one I think is about 5.5. So I'll trim these down. And what I'll do is I'll cut them down to the 5 inches. And then this extra piece, I will save this because this will be a great strip for a scrappy quilt. Have you seen the converging corners? It's a log cabin that uses multiple size strips, wide and narrow, and they work great together. This will be beautiful for that. Then this is a piece, actually there's a couple pieces here that are 8 inches wide. So when I cut this fat quarter, I cut off 10 inches. I was probably using layer cakes or maybe even 2.5-inch strips. But I left an 8-inch piece so I can go back now, cut off my 5-inch. That still leaves me 3 inches where I can cut a 2.5-inch strip or use it as is. So there are some options here which I appreciate, and I'll cut some full fat quarters for you here in a minute to show you how that works. So with these pieces pre-cut at 5 inches, I'm going to lay them out, and the selvages are still on, so I'll trim those off, but I want to make sure I get a straight line here, line it up with my graph, my mat, and put this one here and this one here. So when I'm cutting fat quarters, sometimes I'll cut more, and if I have the time, to go ahead and fuss through it and put them away where they want to be. But if I'm in a hurry, I'm just going to cut what I need, and then I'll just fold these up like this in the box so I know that's what they will be, and when I need them, I just cut them. And that works really well for me. So I'm going to just cut the selvage off here. I'll line this up on the mat, and I'll cut across at 5 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I always double count because I have made so many mistakes, and some of these that are 6 inches could have been that mistake because I've done it plenty of times. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, and just go all the way across, get my 5 inches, so I have perfect little squares. And I'll do one more over here if I can lean over that far. And I needed 4 of each color, so I'm going to have plenty with this already pre-cut. I have some great strips. These look to be about 3 inches, 3.5 inches. Yep, 3.5. So this will be great. I'll put in the scrap pile. And now this, let's see what I have here. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one is 6 inches and this one is 6.5. So I'm going to take this. Actually, I'll do one at a time because then I can cut them folded. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut it to 5 inches. And I'm just going to put it right up there. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right here. So that gives me about 1.25 inch strip, which will be quite useful on another fun project. And so I have my 5 inches. I'm just going to take off my selvage, even them out. Doesn't want to quite lay flat. And I always double check both sides, because if you've ever noticed, sometimes the selvage can be wider on one side than another, and you want to make sure you get it all off, because sometimes they'll have these little holes, and that's where the pins hold the woven fabric when it's being printed. And those pins, the selvage is what holds the fabric together from unraveling. The pins hold the fabric taut and in place so it can be printed. So we want to make sure that we are outside of that, because you don't want those little holes on your quilt. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to do this one. And I just keep cutting. 2, 3 is 5 until I get all my blocks that I need. And because these are all kind of prearranged for me, and I know what size I have and what I'm dealing with and what I need, this goes pretty darn quickly. And again, I've got a little scrap here. I'm going to put that in the side, and I have all this. So let me go ahead and cut these last couple pieces, and then I will show you what we're going to do next. And I'm laying out my blue fat quarters. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll have 9 of them. And I just want to get them all neatly in a pile. Now, if you're going to use a rotary cutter with more than 3 or 4 fabrics, you want to make sure that your blade is in good shape and that you hold your ruler very tight in place. You don't want it to get wishy-washy and move around, because then your cuts won't be straight. So let me go ahead and show you here. I would definitely recommend pressing these. My apologies for not doing that. I didn't even think about it before hitting record, so my apologies. I'm going to work with this together. I think I'll be okay. There are creases, but for the most part, I can sort of straighten things out as I go. But I will probably press most of them before I sew. Now, when I put my fabrics together to be cut, what I do is I line them up in one corner that works for me, and it's the lower right corner because I'm right-handed. So the two things that I do is I line up this side along the mat. I'm going to pull it over one so I can find the line. There it is. This side along the mat, and then I'm also going to make sure this side is along the grid of the mat, because this means I have a good square from here to here. Now, these fabrics have all been purchased in the same place. They're going to be the same size. If you have fat quarters that are different sizes, I generally put the bigger ones to the bottom, keeping the smaller on top so I can see what I'm doing. This is a curated bundle. They all came from the same place. When you mix in other fabrics, you're going to find multiple sizes, because fabrics aren't all exactly the same size. Neither are fat quarters. You'll find some now come instead of 18, they'll be 19 inches. So just beware of what you have, and always double check that you are cutting in the right dimension. So I have 18 inches by my 20 inches. I need 4 of my charm squares from each of these fabrics. So if I cut this 20-inch piece, which actually it measures 22, then I'm going to have enough to get 4. And that still leaves me 13 inches up here. So then I'll cut a 10-inch piece, and then the remaining 3 inches will just remain the same. So this all works out really well. It's a handy method to organize your fat quarters, because quite honestly, if they stay rolled up or folded up or tied up on a shelf, you're not going to use them. That's just the way it is, because they look too pretty up there and you don't want to mess with them. So notice how I'm holding this in the middle of the ruler. My thumb is kind of between the ruler, also on gripping on the mat, because if this hand is strictly on the ruler, it's very easy for this to move. If I keep my hand partially on the mat, it's less apt to slide. So keep it in the center and then even pressure all the way across. Get a good blade. I'll put a link below. There's a site that has a really good price on rotary blades. And if you're interested, check that out, because I think you'll really appreciate it. And they're great. They're titanium. They're super sharp. I can use them. I can use one for a couple months, and it does great. I probably use it a little longer than I should, but as long as it keeps working, I keep using it. Until I get nicks in it, then I will change my blade. But otherwise, I'll keep going with it. And I find these titanium blades last a very, very long time. So I have my 5-inch strip here. Now I'm going to cut a 10-inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I do that so that I will have, I'm just lining up my ruler. I can't talk and measure at the same time. I do that so I will have some options. So with a 10-inch piece, I can cut layer cakes. I can cut 2 rows of charm squares, or I can get 4 lengths of 2.5-inch strips. So it works out really well. It gives me a variety, and I don't have to cut it now. I wait till I need it, and then I can go in, cut what I want, and we're good to go. So I have my buckets, my bins, my baskets of fat quarters that have been cut into various sizes, and I put them together accordingly. So I have some with these bigger 10-inch strips, some with these narrow, and then if I have extras with my charm squares, I have a place for those too. And so I'm just going to put that to the side. I'll come back and deal with that. And I kind of jumbled these around. So I'm going to trim. I got to talking and I moved my strips. There we go. So let me just line this up over here. Trim off that edge that I think shifted on me. Just need to take a little bit off. And now we cut 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I love this little ruler for cross-cutting charm squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or narrow strips. It just makes it easier than slinging around that big one. And so now I have these strips, and they're 2 inches by 5. So there's a lot you can do with these, and I'll show you in some other scrappy projects some ideas for that. And so now I have this. So these are ready to go. And I have my, let's see, I have my other ones that are good to go. So these are all set. Now I'm going to get into some color pieces and get those cut. Blue is kind of the primary color for this quilt. So I pulled out lots of blues, and I tried to stay to the blue to the gray blue. And while I got a little teal in here, I'm not quite sure. I may pull those out, but there is a bit of green in here, and we're going to have some other green fabrics. I think we can do it. It's going to be fine. These are charm squares that have already been cut. So these are good to go. And I have anywhere from 2 to 4 of these, although I'm not sure about this one. This one I only have 1 of, but it's just such a different color from everything else. It almost is periwinkle, where it's got just a touch of purple, and I don't think it's going to work. So I'm going to set that one aside. I'll see what I think about these teals. I think those are going to work. I'm going with a very dark navy because I do have a couple others that are quite dark, and I think that's going to work fine. So I have these. Now let's see what we have here. These are full fat quarters. These, I think, are pieces that have been pre-cut down. And then this is yardage. And these are fat quarters. So let me go ahead and get these arranged, and we'll get this cut, and I'll show you where we are next. I'm excited about the green fabrics I have to work with. I found some pre-cut charms from other projects that are ready to go that I think are going to work beautifully. They're predominantly green. There's a couple that actually has some blue and green, so that'll work great. And a bit of this light lime green. It's good to have different shades, different tones. This is kind of just it's a single piece just by itself, but I'm okay putting that in there. This is another one that's just a single piece. Actually, no, look at that. I've got some more here, so I'll be able to cut that. So those pieces are ready to go. These are some odds and ends that I have that I am going to cut into my 5-inch squares, and then I have all my pieces cut. We're just about ready to put a quilt together. My fat quarters are cut into charm squares. I have some great colors here that are going to look beautiful in this quilt. The greens and the blues, they work really wonderfully. And the low volume is going to be terrific. Look, we've got some blues and grays, and then we have the creamy whites and a bit of tan. This is going to be a wonderful collection of charm squares to work with. I like how they go together, but let me show you how we're going to put this quilt together. The first thing we do is our initial block. We have 2 different blocks. One block will look like this, with 3 of your focal fabrics and 1 of your low volumes. And then the other block will look like this. Come on. And we're going to put, let's go with, something like this is a little different. Like that. So here's block 1 and block 2. These are going to alternate. And you're going to create an equal number of each of these, depending on the size quilt. If you're going with an equal number of rows, even number, I should say, an even number of rows, then you're going to take this, and it'll work out great for you. Now, the thing to remember is that this and this, when they come side by side, we get our double charm squares together, and this is what's going to create the brick path. Now this block is then going to be repeated right here. So I'm going to go, let's put this blue one up here. I kind of like that. That's fun. Go 1, 2, and 3 with a dark, let's put green in here. That'll be kind of fun. And then, so see how this is the same as that block. Now we're going to go 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to put a low volume here. So see how we're carrying out that pattern, and when the next block comes here, these 2 go together, and this. So as you're putting your 4 patches together, you're easily going to put the overall design in place. It's a quick assembly, because once you have all these taken care of, press them and then you sew them together, and it works great. I love how this pattern goes together. So let me show you a little bit that I have already started and how this can go together. We'll kind of make some room here. So here's the first thing, and I'm a chain piecer, whoops. And so what I would do is I would lay my low volume down with the dark on top, and a low volume and a low volume together. So when these are opened up, then I have my 4-patch just like this. And I'm going to make a bunch of them, and they're all going to look like this. So we start with 2 together like this, and then we end up with 4 pieces in this 3 by 1. So we've got our 4-patch, and just one has the focal point. And I want to mix up this one up here so it's not all the same color, because as this is laid out, I want the colors to sort of blend everywhere and mix up. I don't want any particular color to stand out more than another, or a fabric for that matter. So keep that in mind. If you're using fewer fabrics, you want to may want to place them in a particular manner, but I like mixing it up. So I have the first set, and then I have the second set. And so once these are together, I can start piecing my quilt. I'll lay this block down, and then I'll lay this block down, and I'll sew these together like that. And then in my next row, I'm going to do the opposite and put this one here and this one here and sew it together, and there we are. And we have a larger 4-patch, a 4x4, or a 16-patch if you're going by the individual blocks. Now, I'll tell you, I went ahead and I did this because I find that it's really easy to put a quilt together with these larger blocks. For some reason, I find the little ones a bit tedious. I think I like more instant gratification. I don't mind putting the time in advance of putting all the smaller pieces together. I can run through these, I can just chain piece and put them together, create my small squares, then create the small patches that I need, and then put these together into the bigger picture. And let me show you that. The first thing I do is get my chain stitching together. Whoops, it goes this way. And I have my 3 focals, low volume, 3 low volume, and a focal. And then I do the opposite down here. So this and this is the same, and this is the same. So I'm getting my pairs, and that's how you can tell you're on the right track, because these are paired up, and you want this double block to create that brick pattern. And if you want to just do strips, or let's say you put this together and you want it to be, the whole quilt to be a rectangle instead of just a square, because this is going to be a square. You start with a square, you put squares together, they're going to be a square. If you decide you want to add an extra row on one side, then you can just piece your blocks like this, and you can add this to the bottom or to the sides, and it works out really well. It makes it very flexible. It doesn't lock you in to anything in particular. But what I do want to show you is how these big blocks look, just so you can get an idea of how this quilt is going to come together. Love these colors. The green and the blues are great. What I like about the background is this quilt is going to have more of an all-over pattern than that actual starkness of the white and the color. These are lighter. They definitely create a background. But what I really appreciate is you're going to have some light areas and some darker areas. Just like in the blues and the greens, you're going to have some brighter colors and some that are darker. And it's going to mix up throughout the quilt and make just a wonderful, wonderful design with a lot of variety, lots of things to look at, lots of fabrics to see, a lot of interest, and I just love how it goes together. And the batiks are wonderful, the geometrics, you've got lines and shapes, and then the different florals, and of course dots. You gotta have dots. Somehow I always find a place for dots in my quilts. And these are some of the batiks that I pulled out of my my basket, as well as the ones that were in the original collection. And I just think these are wonderful. These blocks are so pretty. And you know, you see how a bright blue mixed in kind of brightens up the whole thing, and just adding some different colors. I love putting it together this way. because now I can put these together. And what's nice, this is a group of fabrics. When I put the next one together like this, I don't have to worry about, oh, are these colors going to be next to each other? Am I going to have a problem with this matching that? Because it's so many fabrics, number one. I lost track. I know there's maybe 60 or 70 fabrics in here, and that helps too, because you're less apt to be repetitive. If you have a problem with that and you just want to go with, you know, a plain background, choose one and go with it. One or two, you can certainly do that, but I love the mix. I think it just creates so much more interest. And it goes together well, so I can put these together, I can put those together, and before you know it, I have a quilt finished. I think for me, what really works is if you look at the stages that I go through. First, I create these blocks, and then, let me put them over here. Those are the partial ones. These are the ones here. So I get everything cut, and I can set that aside. Okay, time for a break. I get all these quilted, or excuse me, I get all these sewn, and I press them. Okay, time for a break. Then I come back and I put them all together, and I press these. Okay, time for a break. So I don't feel the pressure I do as much as when I'm doing individual squares. If I'm doing all this in individual squares, we're talking 168 squares to do the sort of smallish lap size. And that's a lot to fuss with at one time without taking a break. So more apt than not, I'm going to, you know, stop in there somewhere along the way, and that's where I'll make a mistake. But when I break it down into stages like this, into components that go together easily, oh my goodness, it just is so much simpler for me. And you may or may not choose to do it this way, but I just wanted to show you because it's an excellent way for me. And if you look at things in a different way, that you like breaking it down into sections, then definitely try this and see what you think. But what you also find is just about every quilt you do, you can do the same thing with. Now, granted, if you have, you know, a 12-inch square and it's a star, yes, they're all going to repeat. But when you do an all-over pattern like this, which is something I really like because they go together fast and you use a ton of fabric and they look awesome, everybody always loves them, so make it easy. Put it together in the simplest way that you can. So you've seen how I've done this. There is a free download for this particular pattern, and you can get that down below in the description. I'll put the link down there, but I'd love for you to give this a try. Let me go ahead and sew these blocks together and show you what it's going to look like. Here's the crib size version of the baby bricks pattern, and it uses two charm packs, one with focal fabric and one with either low volume or background, whatever you decide to use. And it's 9 squares by 9 squares. It's a very quick, doing an afternoon kind of a quilt, and it's just adorable, and it makes such a great little quilt as a gift for somebody. Here's the lap size version in a similar layout, similar color with the low volume, though this is more white on white, so it has a brighter background, but has all those bright batik. I think this quilt looks wonderful with a bright, bold contrast of the white against the batiks. They look beautiful. And here's today's quilt, and I love these colors. There's such a rich combination with the blues and the greens. I particularly like these bright blue blocks that are spread out throughout the quilt, and I just think it adds a lot of interest, and the greens are terrific. These colors just came together really well. This part here is the 9 large squares I put together. If you want to make it rectangle, this is what I was talking about by just adding the extra row. So there's so much you can do. It's so versatile. You can change it around in so many different ways, but it's a very fun quilt to make. I hope you get to give it a try. Thanks so much for following along and watching today. It's been a pleasure sharing this quilt with you. Have a great rest of your day.